Hey, what's going on, guys? Happy Anzac Day to all you guys. It's April 25th here in the United States, and then on April 25th is a holiday in Australia and New Zealand, and it's Anzac Day is to honor all the soldiers from Australia and New Zealand that fought in all the wars. And I'm mainly going to focus on the Korean War, and one of the reasons I am is because I lived in Korea for 2 years. And the Australians and the New Zealanders did amazing things in the Korean War. I've discussed those accomplishments with you guys before on YouTube. I'll briefly go over them again. Okay, the Australian military, the Australian Air Force was actually the first Air Force in the Korean War, and they mainly flew the F-51 Mustang because the F-51 Mustang did largely ground support missions. The North Koreans would come and charge the U.S. soldiers the Battle of Pusan perimeter, and the Australian F-51 Mustangs would come down and stop the North Korean soldiers. And Addison Terry, a U.S. soldier in the 25th Infantry Division, largely credits the Royal Australian Air Force for saving a lot of U.S. soldiers' lives. Also, we talk about the Australian Navy. They were in the Battle of Incheon, the turning point of the Korean War, and there were a lot of islands where South Koreans lived, islands off the mainland near Incheon. And the North Koreans starved them, wouldn't give them a lot of food and aid. But Australian ship, the Shoalhaven, went there and distributed a lot of food and aid to a lot of South Koreans on those islands. So God bless the Australian sailors for that. The Australian Navy also escorted a lot of U.S. troop ships to from Japan to South Korea. So they escorted a lot of U.S. troop ships from Japan to South Korea so the U.S. soldiers could land safely there. Also, the Australian Army, actually, this happened on Anzac Day in 1951, April 22nd to April 25th, 1951. They defended Hill 504 in the Battle of Kapyong. And the Battle of Kapyong, the Australians and Canadians and New Zealanders held off the Chinese forces. And the Chinese were stopped, and that kept them from taking Seoul. So that kept Seoul out of communist hands, that battle right there. The Canadians radioed the New Zealand soldiers to fire artillery very close to them because the Chinese soldiers were only a few feet away from the Canadian soldiers, and the New Zealand soldiers only hit the Chinese soldiers. They didn't accidentally hit the Canadian soldiers. And they did similar things in the Battle of Marjong San, helping the 3rd Royal Australian Regiment. The New Zealand Artillery Unit was known as K-Force. And K-Force had the record in the Korean War firing most artillery rounds in a day. They fired 10,000 artillery rounds in one day. No artillery unit in the war came close to that. And also the New Zealand Navy was in the Battle of Incheon as well. One New Zealand sailor was killed in the Battle of Incheon. The first two New Zealand Navy ships that came to the Korean War, the Chitara and the Pukaki, and they did a lot of troop escort missions in the Korean War as well, in the New Zealand Navy. Also, the 3rd Royal Australian Regiment was the main infantry regiment that fought in the Korean War. They began major operations on October 2nd, 1950, just 5 days after they arrived in Korea. They arrived in Korea on September 27th, 1950, and they set up a lot of, the first mission they did was set up a lot of telephone lines around South Korea, and the South Korean military, the South Korean Army was very, very impressed with their efficiency and accomplishments. So God bless the 3rd Royal Australian Regiment for that. They also were largely responsible for defending Hill 504 in the Battle of Kapyong, and also holding off the Chinese invasions in the Battle of Marjong San. So God bless the Australian Army. Also, 281 Australian soldiers are interned in the UN Memorial Cemetery in Busan. I visited that cemetery many, many times when I was in South Korea. And 281 out of the 339 Australian soldiers that died in the Korean War. A total of 339 Australian soldiers died in the Korean War. And actually, one of the first Australian casualties was a guy by the name of Ken Hummerston. And he is interned at the UN Memorial Cemetery in Busan. And his wife wanted to be buried alongside him, so she's interned there as well. Wives have the option of being buried alongside their soldier husbands. And also, the waterfall that you see at the UN Memorial Cemetery in Busan, that is in honor of 17-year-old Australian soldier J.P. Daunt. He was 17. He was the youngest casualty in the Australian Army, one of the youngest casualties in the Korean War. And it's a beautiful water area, water fountain. It's Goldfish Pond. It's called the J.P. Daunt the JP Daunt the JP Daunt Pond, excuse me. And it's where a lot of goldfish are, and JP Daunt was only 17 years old when he passed away, dying helping keep Korea free. Also, the Australian soldiers and the New Zealand soldiers, most of them, if not all of them, were not racially prejudiced. Example, Reg Saunders, he was an Aborigine. An Aborigine is the indigenous population of Australia, and he admits to facing lots of discrimination in the civilian world when he was in Australia, but he didn't admit to facing any of that as a soldier. And when he fought in the Korean War, he was accepted as an equal, and he notes that. His artifacts and his medals are on display at the Australian War Memorial in Australia. So, the Australian soldiers that came to Korea were not racist. Also, in the New Zealand military, 1 out of 7 New Zealand soldiers were Maori. Maori is the indigenous population of New Zealand, and they were segregated in World War II. But in the North Africa campaign fighting against the Germans, the All-Maori Battalion fought so impressively. They were integrated in the military and a lot in the civilian society after World War II. And 1 out of every 7 New Zealand soldiers were Maori, and they fought alongside the Caucasian soldiers from New Zealand. And the New Zealand Memorial, the New Zealand Monument in Busan at the UN Memorial Cemetery, it's half in English and half in Maori. So God bless the brave Australian and New Zealand soldiers for what they did in the Korean War. And there's one reason I'm very critical of anti-white behavior. We do not need to insult the soldiers from Australia and New Zealand. The vast majority of them that came to the Korean War were not prejudiced in the least. So now, many Aborigines, including Reg Saunders, admit to facing prejudice at that time in Australia in the civilian world, but not in the military world. So, hope everyone's doing well. Take care. God bless, and bye-bye. Bye-bye.